All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our meager audience here live in person at the Tacoma School of the Arts Theater. People will be filtering in. And then also our audience online. Welcome to our weekly interview series and concert series. Today, we have the great pleasure of having a wonderful pianist and composer and educator. This is Peter Adams, and happy to have him with us here today to talk about his life in music and projects and education, all that kind of good stuff. So, Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yes. This has been some time in the making. We talked about
Yeah.
doing this. You've got an upcoming album. We said, well, when the album's coming, let's do
Right.
this to kind of get some conversation about it.
Yeah.
I always forget to mention this stuff, so we're going to do the interview for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open up the last 15 minutes to questions. So if you have questions either in person or online, feel free to jump in and let us know, and we'll get to as many as we can. And if we can't get to them in real time, if you're watching this after the fact, just put it in the comment section, and we'll be happy to address those when we can. So Peter, I think I'm trying to remember how old I met you a long time ago.
Yeah.
How old were you when I first met you?
I think I was 18.
Okay, and you're 35
now.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been a bit.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about how you got started playing music? How did that all come to happen?
So I started playing piano actually when I was 8. And with me, it was kind of an interesting story. I had a lot of a lot of birth defects and medical issues and stuff as a kid. So one of the things is I had my foot amputated when I was 8 due to like a birth defect and everything. And it was actually my choice to get it amputated. But when I went through that, I had a neighbor that was a piano player in the neighborhood. And I was kind of always like drawn to the piano. We had a piano in the house growing up. And I would kind of mess around on it and stuff. But the neighbor who was a piano player kind of saw that I was really interested, and he kind of convinced my parents to get me piano lessons. So thank you, Steve, if you're listening.
So
yeah.
was your neighbor the person that taught you, or he was just
he kind of started off teaching me, and then we got lessons with another lady named Sharon, and she was kind of like my first kind of like piano teacher and stuff. And then I was with her for a few years, and then I moved on to another one named Kirsten, and she was great. It started off kind of the traditional piano lessons and everything, going through like the lesson books and stuff. And then after those two, they were great. I think I was with them until I was probably like 12 or 13, I think.
And you grew up in Puyallup, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what about, so you said 13?
Yeah, around there.
Now, I know many elementary schools out this direction have, music programs and things of that nature in school. Did you have any type of?
Yeah, because of my kind of like medical stuff and everything like that, I was kind of like in and out of the hospital as a kid. So I actually ended up homeschooling until like almost through high school. But there was, back then it was cool because there was actually a lot of homeschool band programs. So I joined in junior high. I joined the homeschool band and did like percussion, and then I think I played bass as well in band. And I was doing that until high school. And then I was there was a Puyallup homeschool band back then, and then I think it was Carol Brewster was the instructor there. And that was a lot of fun. And then I moved. I went over to the Port Orchard homeschool band, and was driving out there to go to band, like in high school.
If you're not from the Pacific Northwest, driving from Puyallup to Port Orchard is not a simple feat. It's quite
about
a
an hour. Yeah. And you have the bridge tolls and everything to go. So I don't know if there were bridge tolls back then though. It might have been before the Narrows Bridge. Yeah. So I was doing that, and that was great because they had a jazz band, and I was kind of learning a little bit about jazz and stuff. And I played bass in the jazz band actually.
And were you doing electric bass?
I was doing electric bass.
Okay. Did you play acoustic bass as well?
I never played acoustic bass. I wanted to always learn it, but I was never able to get one because they didn't have one in band because their resources weren't as much. But
right. Well, what about early years? I mean, along this time, did your parents listen to music? Were they an influence in any way?
I think they were. I mean, my mom and dad played like flute and trumpet in high school and stuff, so they're kind of musically inclined a little bit. Um, and as a kid, like we would do these games of like they would always put on like classical music, like Mozart and Bach and stuff like that. And um, we kind of listened to those CDs and stuff as a family growing up and stuff. As I was really young, I was probably like 6 or 7 when I remember listening to like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven and stuff, and trying to like pick out what composer it was when they turned on the CD and everything. So that was a lot of fun. So I had a lot of like classical influence growing up. And then I got into jazz kind of later, like in high school. I got a new instructor I met in Puyallup, um, and he had a studio named like GBM Productions or something, or GBM Music School. It was down in Puyallup, and I started taking lessons with him. And he was more of like kind of a rock blues guy. So he was the first guy to introduce me to like what chords were and how to like kind of improvise over chords and stuff a little bit. And it was like simple stuff like using blues scales and stuff like that. But before that, I was doing a lot of like classical stuff, but I also got into ragtime, and ragtime was a lot of fun. I remember learning like the Maple Leaf Rag and Entertainer and all that stuff, when I was like 12, and just fell in love with that kind of stuff, all that like kind of syncopation stuff. Um, yeah, so that's kind of my early influence and stuff. And Brad was the name of the owner of that place, and he was great. He ended up having me work there and teach lessons myself when I was in high school for a couple of years, and that was a really good introduction to me, like kind of teaching lessons and figuring out how to like explain things musically to other people and everything. Kind of fell in love with teaching too. Just kind of figured out I liked trying to explain things in a way that made sense to the student, and having to, figure out how to say something and so it made sense to them.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I've talked about this with other guests. And I guess whatever you're teaching, everybody learns differently, and you might have to, when you're explaining something, one person might not understand it. You might have to come up with 5 or 6 different ways to explain that same material, which also makes you learn the material better yourself.
Yeah, you got to know it really well. That's what I figured out. Yeah.
Well, so at this time, did you start putting together any groups or bands or?
Yeah, I was playing. Well, and then I think we in high school, I in the Port Orchard homeschool band, there was a jazz camp that a saxophone player came in named Lenny Price. Yeah, and he taught this like jazz camp over a week in Port Orchard, and I went there and met a bunch of people there that were really nice, and we ended up starting one of the dads there started a group out of his house that he kind of did him some parents and kids, kind of a combo group together called Dot Swing. And we would go out they lived out in Bremerton, so I'd drive out to Bremerton for rehearsals. And
even further.
Yeah, so I'm used to driving long distances, the life of a musician. So yeah, but we would play the like the Bremerton Blackberry Festival at the airport every year, and sometimes Lenny Price would come in and sit in on the gig. And so that was my first like kind of experience playing with a professional musician. I think it was like 15 or 16, something like that. And that was great. We did like kind of little like swing arrangements and little like mini combo swing stuff, and yeah. So
homeschool through high school, all the way through high school, the whole time.
Yeah. And then actually Pierce College was the first kind of school I went to. Yeah. So then I met you in the jazz band, and that you're obviously a big influence on me. Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of where my trajectory for I really like this jazz stuff kind of took off.
Well, that's where I first met you, and that was you said you were 18 at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, you already read beautifully. I mean, that was all together, and had knowledge of improvisation, because I remember we would always audition all the different students that came in, and it was like, there's no problem, come play.
Yeah.
And so how long were you with the Pierce College band?
Longer than my degree took. So I think it was like probably 4 years. Yeah. And Yeah, because I had come back to the band like after I had graduated, I think, because you needed a piano player still. So I was like, oh yeah, um, yeah. So I think it was like 4 years. I think.
Well, I mean, for me, I directed that band for 10 years, and the nice thing about that was the support from the school at the time, the beginning part of that, in terms
Yeah.
of scholarships for students,
Right.
allowing the band to travel, bringing in guest artists.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to me when I'm asking different people about their time in college, because a lot of times that's colleges have stipends to bring in guest artists. So
Sure.
I don't even remember. I mean, to me, it was all kind of a blur. But do you remember any artists that we brought in that were impactful to you when we were there?
Yeah, I remember the jazz festivals you would put on were awesome there. The Pierce College Jazz Festivals. I remember Tom Marriott had a really good clinic when he came in. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember it's kind of a blur who was there. But I think Jovino Santos Neto was there. He was I remember loving him and his playing.
Oh, he played with the band.
Yeah.
And we did a gig that was at the Mandolin Cafe.
Yeah, he played melodica, and that was like I was like blown away by that because I had never seen it before.
You play melodica now.
I do, yeah. Yeah. So I just remember the Pierce College, like it was such a fun time because I met a lot of really good friends there that I'm still friends with today, and you obviously, yeah, just such a big influence on me, and going on those band trips and stuff. Those are some of the best memories I've had.
Which festivals did we get to go when you were in the band?
I remember going to the Lionel Hampton Festival and then the Reno Festival. Yeah, I remember that, and then I remember the Reno Festival. I remember dislocated my knee, and then I had to
I remember this.
Yeah.
This was a terrible incident.
Yeah, we played the gig in a wheelchair without my leg on and stuff. That was hilarious. Got some sympathy points from the judges. Ended up winning.
Yes. All right. Well, during that time, I mean, I remember you starting to play and getting bands together and stuff. So, who were some of the initial musicians that you started working with at that time?
So I'm trying to remember. Dylan Derringer was one from Pierce College that I would hire in combos a lot. John Robinson, I would have him play in combos, and Michael Volz was another one. Yeah, and so I would hire them a lot for gigs, and we'd play at this coffee shop a lot by my house in Puyallup called the Oasis Cafe. It's not there anymore, but yeah, we would.
How long ago was that?
That was probably 10 or 12 years ago at this point. Yeah,
we had this conversation before, so it seems like 2 weeks ago. It does not seem like 10 years ago.
It's crazy. Yeah, so that was my first, and then the Mandolin Cafe before that. I would get gigs there and hire different people, and then eventually I hired. I met actually the biggest thing is I also during that time period 18 to 20 or 21 when you started the sax jam sessions, that was a huge growth period for me because I met a lot of the people that I am playing with now through that jam session. So I remember every Tuesday for probably 2 years. How long did that session last?
It was a couple years, and it's now that location. It's now Dirty Oscar's Annex. It's like a restaurant, but that's where the location was. And I think the owner owned both the building, Saks, and North China Garden, which I don't even know if that's still there. I think it's gone now too.
I don't know. Yeah. So during that time, I was doing a jazz clinic with Osama Afifi, and that's where I met Brian Smith, who's in Velocity now. And we were doing that, and then we would do the jazz clinic there, and then go out to your jam session afterwards every Tuesday for a year or two. And that was just a huge growth period of being able to just play every week.
Well, I think the thing that you're mentioning is we had the big band at Pierce College, and then after that concluded, there was a combo class.
Yes.
And then that after doing that a couple years, then we moved to Ted Brown, and then Osama was running it at Ted Brown, and then it changed over again. Now it's actually the thing that we're doing with the World Orchestra. It's still on
cool.
Tuesday nights.
That's awesome.
It's still going. So I'm trying to think okay, it's been maybe almost at least 15 years.
Yeah, that's 15 years probably.
Crazy.
Wow. Cool.
Well, So you mentioned velocity. So you're starting to play at sax. You're in college, out of college, just kind of helping
Yeah.
out playing the big bands,
Mhm.
traveling, teaching lessons at the same time.
Yeah.
So when did you get the idea to start Velocity? Or I mean, well, you were writing. When did you start writing songs, your own songs?
I
Let's start with
started
that.
writing probably when I came to Pierce. I started writing and arranging a little bit, and got into it because I took the music theory classes at Pierce and really kind of fell in love with music theory and kind of how things work.
Who was teaching that? Was that Jerry?
It was Jerry Knutson, and then I think Kelly Coons was teaching the first year, and then Jerry was teaching the second year.
Excuse me, I was going to say the pianists a lot of times played in the big band and then also would play. They had Far West in the choir. Did you get a chance to do any accompanying?
I didn't.
For the choir?
I think that was I think he hired professional musicians for the rhythm section in that. So I never got a chance to play with the Far West group, but
that was always a bone of contention with me. And I
Yeah.
think we've probably talked about this, but you have these colleges that are basically places for students to learn.
yeah,
And instead of giving the students the opportunity to back up, and this happens a lot, particularly with jazz choirs, instead of giving students there the opportunity to learn and grow by backing up the choir, they always are
Right.
bringing in professional musicians and paying them out
Yeah.
of the school funds. And therefore, the students don't get the opportunity to play.
Yeah.
I understand why they do it, because they want their bands to sound great and they want them to win festivals.
Right.
But if the school is there to serve the function of education, why are you taking that opportunity away from the students?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not asking you
Yeah,
to
no,
solve
I
this
know.
problem, but
I
mean,
agree
it's
with
a
you.
thing.
Yeah, I agree. But it's just the way it was. So, but yeah, and then I was taking lessons with you for when I was at Pierce for probably I don't know, yeah, at least a couple of years. And then after I stopped with you, I went on. I went on to Randy Halberstadt and taught with him or took lessons with him privately for probably like 4 years.
I remember talking to Randy about this because
Oh,
when
really?
I asked him, I was like, "Oh, Peter, is he plays great? He already knows all my stuff." I'm like, "Yeah." Yes, he
Yeah.
was very, very happy to have you as a student.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, he was awesome. I learned so much from him. Yeah, he's very philosophical in his approach, and it was cool. So,
Do you have his book?
I do. Yes, I've read it.
Shameless plug for
Yeah,
Randy's
yeah.
book, Metaphors for the Musician.
That's one of the best out there.
Well, but I've heard through the grapevine, just, I mean, I'm in my little world teaching and playing, and it's super busy, and as you are too, but I always hear different things. Did you also study with John Hanson as well?
I did, yeah,
Okay.
for like probably like 6 months or a year or something like that. Yeah, he was great. He had like a whole different approach. So it's cool to kind of pick each other's, all those top players' brains and everything on how they think about music and everything.
Any other? I mean,
yeah,
you've named
so
some of the
recently I
great
took,
piano players in the Northwest. So who else have you?
Yeah,
been
so
with?
Eric Verlinde I took for probably like a year, and he was phenomenal as well. Yeah, just had a whole different perspective on music, kind of like, yeah, it's really cool. So, and then I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, I think Randy, John Hanson, and Eric were kind of the main three that jazz pianists that I took lessons with.
Any other musicians that maybe weren't pianists that you grabbed some lessons from, or not really?
Not that I remember. Just kind of like hanging out with people and talking with them, but no like kind of formal lessons. I took a lot of like.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I did a lot of like the online courses with like the Jeff Keezer videos and stuff like that. And spent a lot of time with those, and those were great. And yeah, just trying to think of like influences on me, like piano player wise. Gene Harris was like probably the big first influence that I heard, like a jazz pianist. Like I remember hearing his the Ray Brown trio version of Summertime, like that arrangement, and I just was like blown away. So I like transcribed that at one point, and yeah. So I have like kind of, because Gene Harris was kind of my like biggest influence, like early years. I have a lot of like that bluesy stuff in my playing from him. Bill Evans, Oscar Peterson were another big influences on me. And then some modern guys like Eldar Jangarov.
Was he? I'm trying to remember, because I remember seeing him at Lionel Hampton when I took the band over there. Was he an artist when we went there?
I think so. Yeah, I think I might have seen him there live. Yeah, and that was another one that just kind of blew me away. His chops are just ridiculous.
Well, cool. So, all right. So you're writing music. You're technically out of college at this point. So you have an associate's degree from Pierce College.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. And then so you're teaching, you're playing, you're
Yeah.
writing, getting the band together. So what was the impetus to get Velocity started?
That was it kind of happened through the sax jam session. I met Cliff through them or through that jam session. I met
Say Cliff. People that don't. You're talking
Cliff.
about
Sorry, I
Cliff
met
Colón.
Cliff Colón
Yeah.
through that jam session, and then Rob Hutchinson. I met there, and then got talking with them at the jam session, and then hired him for a gig at the Mandolin Cafe. And then I had some tunes ready to go for that gig, and they just really liked the tunes and were excited about them, and told me to write more. And then I'm like, okay. And then I hired those guys for more gigs at the Mandolin, and then we just kind of started gigging more together. And then I started writing more tunes, and eventually we built enough tunes to record an album, and that was like 2014. I think our first album was released. We recorded at Pacific Studios.
So you're the leader of the band.
Mhm.
Conceptually, it's your group.
Yeah.
When you guys write tunes, is it all like you're writing everything, or is there like collaboration on some of
It's a
those?
lot of
things, or-
collaboration too. I kind of come up with an idea, a groove, and melody and everything. It's probably like 80% there. And a lot of times, early days, I would go over to Brian Smith's house, and we would like kind of jam out ideas. And then I go home and like write out a chart and develop it and stuff, and then bring in a chart that was sort of there. And then we would play it on the gig, and then through the gig process, we'd kind of like rearrange the tune and be like, this solo section doesn't sound good here, let's do it. So we kind of arranged the stuff as a band, and that's kind of how it's worked for the last like 10 or 12 years that we've been together. So
Well, I know. I mean, I know Cliff plays very well, and he's written a couple tunes. He's not a big writer. I do
Right.
know this. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm his
yeah.
friend, and I can talk some smack here.
Yeah.
But he's not a huge writer. But he does write some tunes that
Yeah.
are really cool. I think one
Yeah.
is the one that comes to mind is Singularity. Do you guys?
That was Summer's tune. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've played that one as Velocity and stuff.
So
and
Summer wrote the tune.
Summer wrote that
Okay,
one.
forgive
Yeah.
me. So
Summer
Cliff
wrote
has
that
written
one.
0 tunes.
Well, he's written a couple. Yeah, he's written a couple now. Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember the names of them, but I don't think we've played them yet, and we want to. But I think Limited Edition, his other band that he's in, has played them.
Well, what about like Rob or Brian? Do they contribute anything?
Rob has written one or two tunes that we've played. Like Generator is one that he's written that we play a lot, and that's a super fun one. But like 95% of the tunes that we play are from me. Yeah, so.
And in terms of like management for the band, you're doing all the booking and the promoting. And all
it's kind of split between me and Brian. Brian does a lot to kind of keep everything going and running and stuff.
Well, that makes sense. He's in sales, so
yeah,
that makes total sense.
He's a perfect fit for that job. So.
Well, so and you said the first recording was 2014.
Yeah.
And so the band, I mean, despite the pandemic and all this, is still going strong.
Yeah, we're still going strong. We're still playing. They're playing next week at the Spanish Ballroom with me for my CD release. So yeah.
And so the CD release, that's not a Velocity album, is it? Or
correct. So that album came about during the pandemic. In 2020, I was kind of in lockdown, and actually I had was diagnosed with cancer at that point. I was going through chemo, which thankfully it's all gone now. But I just wanted to have something to do. So I decided to kind of like record a project from my house. So I ended up just like, writing some songs and then recording like a piano scratch track, and then would send it to like the drummer, like Brian is on it or another drummer. And then we just kind of send them back and forth until we were happy with some takes, and then send it to a bass player, and then he'd send his track back. And then
is this the project that you called me for?
Yes.
Okay, now I understand.
You're on the album, by the way.
Okay, now I understand. All right.
Yeah.
That music's hard. It's
Yes.
very hard music.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's cool. It's cool. It's very hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. And so that's happening.
That's happening on the 22nd at the Spanish Ballroom at McMenamin's.
And that's free, all ages.
Yeah, free all
McMenamin's
ages. Yeah.
Here in Tacoma.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And you said, excuse me, it's a double bill with Velocity and
and the Peter Adams Quartet is what we're calling it. But we're playing the Peter Adams Quartet's playing songs from the album, from the new album, and then Velocity's doing our newer stuff as well.
I see. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So it should be a fun concert.
So aside from leading your own projects, those are kind of the main one, the Peter Adams Quartet and Velocity. Are there any other groups that you're running?
Not running. I do some sideman stuff. Like I play with Eugenie Jones a lot for her stuff. I'm kind of one of her main calls for being a piano player, accompanist. Those are kind of the main ones. And then just kind of random side gigs that I take.
Do you, as a sideman, particularly, I know a lot of vocalists a lot of times will call upon their pianists to arrange stuff, arrange music, or write music.
Yeah.
Do you do any of that stuff for Eugenie?
I have, yeah. I have. In fact, yeah, one of the songs I wrote, actually, she put on her new album that was out, which was cool. There's actually, I wrote one about, because I'm actually on dialysis right now because I've had kidney failure, but I wrote a song to kind of like bring awareness to kidney transplants and stuff like that. And she recorded the vocals on it and kind of helped with the lyrics a little bit. And then she put that on her album, which was cool. So it'll get kind of some play and everything. So
you guys are splitting the copyright on this?
Yes,
Who's getting the royalties? That's the question.
Yes. So it's all good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, what about teaching? So now you've been teaching for a long time. So I remember at one point, if I recall, you were teaching in Issaquah.
Yes.
But now you said you're doing most of it online. So talk a little bit about your studio and
So the teaching thing I've been doing probably since I was like 16. And that's kind of been my main gig for making money, since then. So I started out teaching at that GBM music school in Puyallup. And then when that closed down, I actually, for a little while, I was working at like this bookstore in Kent. And then
forgot about this.
Yeah. There was a used bookstore we sold on Amazon and stuff. It was like a warehouse job.
Didn't John also work there?
Everybody worked there.
Max Mayer also.
It was everybody worked there.
Half of the Pierce College band worked
half
in
of
this
Pierce
store.
College worked at that store. Yeah. My mom worked there too. Yeah. Yeah. So my brother worked there. Yeah. It was a whole family affair.
What was this? I mean, because I just remember hearing hilarious stories that I don't know if it was like appropriate to tell on this thing, but what was the name of this? What was the premise of this business?
It was a used bookstore that sold books and stuff through Amazon. So it was we just ship out books all day in a big warehouse. So Once Sold Tales was the name of the place. So so that was a fun job, and lots of shenanigans went on. So and then after that gig is when I got the job through a friend that I played a gig with, who was a guitar player, was teaching at this school in Issaquah named Kaleidoscope School of Music in downtown Issaquah, right on like Front Street there. And then he recommended me to the owner because they were looking for a pianist or a piano instructor. And this was probably like 10 years ago now. So I got an interview there and started working there like one day a week. And it went great. I booked my day that I was there, like, within like a month. It was pretty full, and then just slowly kind of built up and added days and everything. Eventually I was doing like 5 days a week there.
Were you commuting back and forth? You
moved
up
north
at
one point I moved up to Renton. A few years ago. I was living in Renton for probably like 3 years, so the commute wasn't as bad. But yeah, when I was starting out, I was commuting, like an hour drive. But thankfully the hours, it wasn't as bad because of traffic. I was working like 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. Teaching. So.
And now you said most lessons that you do are online lessons, correct? Yeah,
I'm doing online lessons right now. Mainly just because I'm living out Puyallup again, and then doing like the dialysis kind of takes a long time every day. So it's like a second job.
Well, so yeah, exactly. Well, so how many students are you comfortable teaching right now? Do you have a full studio, or is it just kind of relaxed?
It's a little more relaxed right now. I have about like 25, 30 students right now. But I mean, at my peak, I was teaching like 70 students, so eventually it'd be cool to get back to that, but we'll see. I don't know. I'm actually enjoying the time that I have, not having 70 students. So
now that things are slowly opening back up in terms of places to perform, and also for your teaching possibilities too. It seems like people are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of remote education. Which
Yeah,
is good.
honestly, for me personally, the pandemic was a big blessing in the sense that it happened right as I needed to go remote. Because at the time I was like going through cancer and chemo and stuff, and then that kind of hit all at the pandemic side. So that was like a crazy time in and of itself. Um, but thankfully, people were a lot more understanding and willing to do the online stuff and be flexible with their schedules because of that. So it was a big blessing in a sense that I was able to kind of continue on with lessons and just didn't have to stop cold turkey.
Well, and it seems like too, you can kind of divide a room asking people about their opinions with online education and learning. Some
Yeah.
people are all for it, and some people absolutely hate it, and it just depends on the individual.
It depends on the individual. Honestly, some have done great, others haven't. It's been more of a struggle, but
in terms of teaching piano, what are your opinions? Are you clearly you're a fan of it?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think with piano in particular, as long as you can kind of show like your hands and the camera and everything can be on the piano and kind of explain things well and like share files and stuff like that, it's totally fine. The one downside is you can't really, it's harder to jam together, and that's like the one downside. It's possible, it's just not as fun.
Both parties have to have all the stuff dialed in really, really well, and that
exactly.
can be a challenge
Yeah,
sometimes.
exactly. It depends on the person's connection and stuff. So,
well, now with things in terms of performance spaces, opening back up, you said you got the show coming up at McMenamins. Any other projects or concerts or things coming up, or more regular things that you're doing?
Yeah, we were doing the New Frontier thing on like a monthly rotation. They just closed down. But we're going to be doing some shows at the Valley in Tacoma. And then I'm playing the Art Walk in Issaquah on June 11th with the Peter Adams Quartet to kind of do another CD release show out there. Kind of see some of my old students out there,
So the Velocity, the lineup for Velocity is who are the members?
So that band is Rob Hutchinson, Brian Smith, and Cliff Colón, and myself.
And Rob is the bassist. He's doing mostly electric bass,
yes.
Correct? Okay. And what about for the Peter Adams Quartet?
That one is the main guys are Osama Afifi on bass, and then Mason Hargrove on guitar, and then Brian Smith, and then Jason Edwards is the other guy that I met at Kaleidoscope. He's a teacher there. He's a great player, and he recorded on half the album. So Jason Edwards is going to be on the 22nd at the Spanish Ballroom playing.
And is Osama playing electric bass on this one too?
He wasn't available, so Rob's going to be doing double duty on that one. Yeah.
All right. Well, in terms of composing music, when you go about doing that, do you have like a process for doing that? Because you're doing most of the writing for the groups. I mean, you have some sort of system. I know some people like get up every day, they write. Or how do you have any system for the composing that? Because I guess the reason I'm asking this is, I know a lot of musicians, as do you, and you do, I think, far more writing than most musicians that I know. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
But do you have some sort of system for writing, or is it just catch as catch can, or how do you go about it?
A lot of times it's inspiration based. If I hear like a certain song or something, or like a certain vibe that I want to try to like emulate, I'll kind of sit down and mess around with it until I come up with something cool. And I like honestly, like it's a lot of messing around on the piano. And I spend most of my time like, that's why I'm not the best like improviser in the world, because I spend more time writing than like, but I think for me it's I have like on my phone I have like hundreds of voice memos that I just record little ideas.
I have the same thing.
Yeah, and then I'll go back and listen to them, and then like some of them like I'll get it depends on the song. Like I'll get one song done in like 15 minutes, and then the other one I'll have like in my phone for like 3 years, and then go back and listen to it and be like, oh, that was a cool idea, and then I'll come up with the B section that I could never come up with before.
It's funny because I had the same conversation with Dave Marriott not that long ago, and he was talking about one of his professors at UW that would always keep this was back, it has to be in the 80s at this point.
Yeah.
A long time ago. But he kept a little scratch pad. He would write things. And I heard, I can't remember, I think it was Mozart did the same thing. He'd just walk around with a pad. He'd go out and just write down. It wasn't even an idea, or it wasn't even like staff lines.
Yeah.
It was like he would just write a picture of something, and that picture would remind him of the little scrap melody or whatever he had, and then flesh it out from there. But yeah, I think that's kind of the way to go, because you have it in that moment, and you might not have time to complete the thought.
Yeah,
but if you have that little kernel.
I think that's the most important thing, is like in the moment of inspiration, record it or document it somehow. Because otherwise it's going to be gone 5 minutes later, you know.
I'll be in public somewhere and I'll be like singing in my phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is wrong with
I've
this
done
person?
that.
Security.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So well, here's another question, because I know you've done 2 albums with Velocity so far.
3 actually. Yeah.
3, excuse me. And then you've got the new album coming out, and you're writing all the time. I know for me, prior to the pandemic, we probably had enough material to record, do like 3 more albums, and then we've been writing ever since the pandemic. Yeah. I'm assuming that's the case with you. How much material do you have like backlogged ready to record?
No, there's a ton. I think for Velocity especially, we have probably enough for another album at least. We're actually playing a bunch of songs live that we haven't recorded yet that we want to record like this year or next year. So we're trying to figure out the best way to record and do sessions and stuff. Going forward. So
were all the things done? I know the project that I did with you was at Brian's home. Do you guys actually go into studios and do stuff, or is it all?
So for Velocity, we've all done live studio sessions. So we did, our first one was at Pacific Studios, and we played live on those in studio, and like a few overdubs and stuff. But for the most part, we did like 1 or 2 takes, and just those were it. And then the second album we did at David Lang Studios in Edgewood, and that was great. That was he's awesome. And we recorded videos on that one. We had a video crew come in on that one, and that was cool because we had some really nice, like, professionally done videos that I ended up editing. So that was a lot of work, but. Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. And then our latest album was done at Studio Litho in Seattle with Floyd Reitzma doing audio. So.
Well, let's see. So you mentioned the concert coming up on the 26th. Did you say
22nd?
Excuse me.
So
22nd.
Next Sunday. Yeah.
Okay. If people wanted to get in touch with you in terms of lessons, or to have you arrange or compose or perform, or how could they do that? Yeah,
but probably the best way is by email. You can reach me at peteradams87@gmail.com, or friend me on Facebook or my YouTube channel. And then if you're interested in checking out Velocity, realvelocitymusic.com, you can check us out, and our YouTube channel, Real Velocity Music. Because unfortunately, when we made the band name, we didn't do a Google search for the band name and realize that there's a ton of Velocity things out there, like a TV station and all this other stuff. So, so we're the Real Velocity Music.
Good. All right, cool. Well, at this time, we're going to open things up to our folks here in person, or our mighty but small audience here in the theater or online. Does anybody at this time have any questions for Peter about his vast life in music and teaching, composing? Any questions at this time?
How'd I compose?
So the question is, how do you get ideas to compose?
Oh, it depends on the song and the place and the time, and like, sometimes it can be like listening to a song that kind of inspires me, and then you try to come up with a similar vibe that's your own thing, or there's an event in life that happens that kind of inspires you. A lot of, I think I kind of write from like a place of like, you take some hardships and you kind of like turn that into a song or music or anything. I kind of like those types of songs just because that's my life. So, but yeah. try to find the hope in everything, you know. So
Excellent question. Other questions? Any online questions? Any online smack talking? I'm assuming there's probably some. Yes, I knew it.
oh, good.
We'll get to those
I
later.
would expect nothing less.
All right. Well, aside from the show coming up with Velocity, do you have any other projects that maybe you're writing for, or things coming up? You said the Art Walk in Edmonds. Any
Yeah.
other shows or things that you're thinking, or things that you would like to do coming up in the near future?
I think, well, eventually, I mean, the dream would be to do, you know, try to like try to get some commission composing for like, you know, video games or movies or something like that, you know. I would love to do something like that. So I just haven't had a project that's come along that I've been able to.
I'm glad you
do
mentioned
stuff
that,
like
because
that.
I wanted to ask this question and I forgot it, and you just reminded me of
Yeah.
it. So I know that you're an avid gamer, and the reason I know
Yeah.
this is because as the director of the music program at Pierce College, you and all the other students were, many
Right.
of them, way into video games and playing all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Which was also, aside from the playing music, kind of a cool thing, because it was a communal thing that you guys would do and have, like, you know,
Yeah.
gaming parties. So do you feel that maybe, and I can speak from my own experience because I grew up playing video games as well, and,
Yeah.
and certainly my musical tastes are inspired and informed by, you know, hours and hours of
Yeah.
misspent youth playing video games.
Yeah.
No judgment, but
Yeah.
do you think that some of the ideas that you get for composing comes from
Oh,
playing
totally.
games?
Yeah, totally. That's a huge influence. Like, all those like, you know, early like PlayStation games and Super Nintendo games and everything like that. You know, I mean, the composers on those guys, like those games, are just super talented. And you go back and listen to those songs, and they're just like so amazingly written. You know, the chord changes and the melodies and everything. Like,
So what we're advocating is for
Yeah.
parents to let their kids play
Yes,
video games,
exactly.
because it will benefit their musical knowledge and history and vocabulary down the
Yes.
line. Are there any oh, hang on one second, there's
Yeah.
a question. So the question is,
Yeah.
excuse me, you've learned to play several instruments. Are you focused more on the piano now, and why?
Yeah. I think for me, yeah. So I started out playing piano, and then I kind in junior high and high school, I played electric bass a little bit and drums a little bit. And those were great. I think for me, like physically, piano was the best fit, I think. You know, because I have some limitations on like with my leg and everything. So I kind of figured out early that playing drums with the hi-hat was a little more work than I wanted it to be. But yeah, I think I just kind of gravitated toward piano because that's what I was the best at, and it kind of clicked for me the most. I think for me, like piano made the most sense visually because it's kind of a linear instrument, whereas like bass guitar or guitar or you know, I tried wind instruments, but I have terrible lungs, so that didn't go well. But yeah, I think it's what I gravitated towards and kind of fell in love with the most. And you can kind of with piano, it's like you can kind of be the one man band instrument, you know, and you can kind of you understand the most through music with piano, I think. And I kind of love that about piano. So,
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll just monopolize the time with more
Yeah.
off the wall questions here. But feel free to jump in if you have questions and interrupt if you're live or online too. So going back to the video games, sorry. Are there any composers or games or game franchises that you really enjoy music to?
yeah, I think oh man, there's a ton. The all the like the Final Fantasy stuff is really good. I love all that stuff. You know, the Nintendo stuff, like, you know, the classic like Mario themes and everything are you know, obviously really good. And then yeah, I think those are kind of the main ones. But I mean, there's a ton. I'm like blanking on all of them. But yeah, I think just in general, like yeah, soundtracks like the I don't know if you've ever played Cuphead, but yeah, like going all those like jazz kind of early 20s jazz styles and stuff like.
I downloaded it in the last few months on. I got a Nintendo Switch because I have two young children. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. I'm like, okay, this will be a good console for them to like. It's more geared towards children.
Yeah.
And I put that game on, and they're like, "This is weird." And
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it was more just visually because it looks like the old time cartoons, like
Right.
from way back.
Yeah.
But yeah, that the soundtrack is
yeah.
cool.
I think the thing that fascinates me about like video game soundtracks or movie soundtracks in general is just how they like have to encompass a feel of a scene or whatever, and through sound and through music. You know, I love that idea of just like having to kind of like come up with an emotion for a scene or an environment or wherever you're in, you know, and conveying that through sound. I think is really cool. And that's what I love about like movie scores and video game scores and everything.
Aside from the composing that you've done with your projects, have you and for vocalists that you've worked with, have you ever done any commissioned work or collaboration with someone writing for specific things like what you're discussing
The
now?
closest thing is I've gotten, so this is, I'm going like full nerd here, but I've composed some stuff for some people that are doing like Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. So I did some orchestral mock-ups for like some kind of fantasy Dungeons and Dragons style songs, like kind of like orchestral epics and stuff like that.
So we see this work in any seasons of Stranger Things, perhaps?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, kind of like Game of Thronesy style, like fantasy epic orchestral stuff. So yeah, I got like on my computer and my recording software at home, I got a bunch of like orchestral, high-end like orchestral sounds and stuff, and did mock-ups of those. And yeah.
When you write, do you do stuff by I know you can, I'm just curious, and for maybe people that don't know, do you do stuff by hand like pen and paper, or does it all done on the computer at this point with software?
Those ones were done on the computer with software. But yeah, I've done a lot of it, and when I write charts for people and stuff, it's usually in Sibelius. So I have charts and everything through them, and for the orchestral stuff, I've done a couple like full-on scores like that in Sibelius, and then kind of transferred it. But when you're doing a mock-up, it's better to just play the stuff, because you can actually do dynamics and put like some sort of emotion and feeling into the recording and stuff. When you try to transfer a Sibelius score over to MIDI and then put like VSTs on it, it kind of like sounds MIDI, you know.
So for oh, there's another question. Sorry.
Electric synth.
So the question is,
yes.
what took you into what took you down the dark path of electric synth? I'm embellishing the question, but
yeah. Well, that was just a experimentation through Velocity's music, I think. The music that I was writing was a lot of like kind of funk, fusion, jazz, odd metered stuff with them, and you know, just that genre kind of goes well with synths and electronic sounds and stuff, I think. So it was just experimentation through those songs that you know, I ended up the song that actually I got a synth for that band. I had this synth called the King Korg, and I got that one when I saw Snarky Puppy's Lingus video and that Corey Henry solo. That's, you know, like his most famous solo or whatever now. But yeah, that inspired me to get that keyboard, and then I ended up taking that one to shows for a while and stuff, and just it really filled out the sound of the band, I thought, you know, with those songs. So so the credit goes to that band for kind of getting me into the electronic sounds and synths and everything. And it's a deep hole. So,
well, I think it's interesting, and this is just my opinion. When you play a certain, like for example, if I were to play a flute or a saxophone or a piano or whatever it might be, you hear the timbre of that sound, and it informs how you write based on what you're hearing. So you're going to hear things differently from the electric synth than you would on like an acoustic grand piano.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean you couldn't play those songs on the other instrument. But when you're hearing that thing, it might lead your ear or your subconscious to a different area of like, oh, a different melody or a different harmony.
Yeah, no, that's true. And as I've kind of gotten more into it, it's like I start thinking more about sound design when I'm writing too. You know, the orchestral stuff helped a lot with that, writing that stuff and the mock-ups and everything. And you don't, you know, and that's why I like writing in a DAW now, you know, and coming up with little mock-ups and everything.
For people that have no idea what you're talking
what a DAW
about,
is, so a DAW is basically an audio interface that you can record multiple tracks at once and kind of do mix downs of different instruments put together. So it's basically a recording software, and you can do multiple tracks at once and stuff.
I wanted to ask you, and again, I understand some people know a lot about what we're talking about. Some people have no idea. So when we're talking about music notation software, kind of like the big two for musicians are Sibelius or Finale, and then there's the free version, MuseScore, which a lot of students can use, which is I use it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Why do you prefer Sibelius over Finale?
It's just what I've used and what I know. Honestly, I never really had Finale, so it was just one that I got early, like when I started writing at Pierce, and I forget if Pierce had Finale or Sibelius. I don't remember when in class, but yeah, it was just the one that I used and had. And then I also use another one on the go, like that I have for iPad, which is Notion. That one's great. I've actually written a lot of stuff through that. And then I kind of like take the score, and it's harder to do like full on complete scores that people can actually read, but it's a fun one to do mock-ups with. And then I kind of take that into Sibelius and kind of finish out the score. But
so for Notion and Sibelius, are you playing straight in, or are you actually notating yourself?
I'm just notating myself. Yeah. So, and that's been one of the best ways for me to learn and get better at reading too. Cause like I come up with these, weird rhythms or whatever, or melodies, and then I have to actually learn how to write it out that makes sense. So, and that's always a process. You should see the notes on the velocity charts that I've attempted to write. And then, Rob's a professor at UPS for music theory. So he's been instrumental in, teaching me nicely how to correct my charts.
That's what I was wondering about earlier, the question about the collaboration in charts. Like, is it more like people are actually bringing in ideas, or figuring out like, how should we write this to make it make sense?
Yeah, no, he's helped a lot with correcting my mistakes. So no, he's been really good. And yeah, it's a lot of like, I'll come in with like the first draft of a chart to a rehearsal or a gig or whatever. And then, cause some sort of existential crisis in Cliff, to have to read it because I wrote it in like an octave that's too high or something like that. It's just trial and error like that. I've made so many like, mistakes like that.
But learned in the process.
And learned in the process. It's a constant learning process. And thankfully they're nice enough to not, get mad at me. Like,
but the thing about this for people that are wanting to start writing music, I mean, did you have any classes in composition or songwriting?
Yeah, it was all
you
self-taught.
Just started.
Yeah, it was all self-taught. So it was all just that, like trial and error, and figuring out what sounded good and what was too hard to play, and
which is kind of a great way to go, I think, because you'll figure it out.
No, that's the thing and with writing for me, I think especially with like velocity or stuff, because I tend to write complex things, but and like odd meters and stuff like that. But I always want it to have like a melody that you can sing along to, and for it to groove and feel good, especially for that band. Like, I think those are the kind of the key cornerstones of having, a good song is like, is the melody catchy and singable? Is the groove, does it feel good? So even if we're writing at odd meters, I don't want it to feel like heady and just like odd meter for odd meter's sake. I want it to just feel good and groove, and so people can kind of latch onto it who aren't musicians. So,
well, before we wrap up here for today, does anybody have any more questions for Peter, either here in person or online? Any other questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace, or at least put it in the comments later. All right, so Peter,
yeah.
Number one, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I've known you for a long time, and I've mentioned this with other guests too. It's like we've never talked about any of this stuff. It's always like talking about the gig or whatever. Oh, I have another question for you, actually.
Yeah.
A selfish question. So everyone that knows you knows that you have a love affair with Diet Coke. Have you ever considered reaching out to them for the sponsorship?
Oh, I wish. Yeah. If they're listening. Yeah. No, yeah. I've had to cut back a lot on Diet Coke though, because of the whole dialysis thing. So, but I still enjoy it. So, yeah.
All right. Let's see. Here you are in 2022. You've already had an impressive career with music, both with teaching and composing and putting groups together. if you were going to give advice to someone who's considering being a musician or undertaking a life as a musician, what are some things that you've learned in your time as a musician that you found very, very helpful and beneficial to your growth, and what would you impart to these people?
Yeah, I think, with anything, it's just be professional, be courteous, be a kind person, you know, work with integrity, and that'll get you really far. I think with being a musician in particular, you have to wear so many hats. You have to book your own schedule. You have to book your own gigs. You have to get your own students, and so it's a lot of like, think of it as almost like a customer service job too. So be good with people, and and learn your craft really well, and develop your craft, and I think the rest will happen if you do those things. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, excellent points. Excellent points. Again, thank you so much for being here. To everybody watching here in person or online, thank you for coming. Again, this is a part of a weekly concert series and interview series that we do, always free. The live streams are always free to be a part of. The concerts are the stuff here in the museum. You do have to pay museum admission to come if you're going to come in person, but all the stuff is online and cataloged online, so you can watch it later. We'd like to thank our sponsors, KNKX, Ted Brown Music, Tacoma Creates, Titus Will Cars, and Edward Jones financial consultant Rick Gray. This would not be possible without their help for sure. And if you find value in what we're doing throughout the year, feel free to make a donation. You can do that via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check, and all the information is at the beginning of this broadcast. We're going to take a short break, do a quick sound check, and then we're going to play a bunch of brand new music that we've written this week for you, both songs of Peter's and mine, and we'll be back at starting at 3 o'clock, so in an hour. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks, Kareem.